The court has always felt that the Constitution and the constitutional fathers intended a very strong executive, and that therefore many powers that aren't even enumerated in the Constitution are implied to make that a strong governor.
The executive order authority is just enormous, almost limitless. The governor can issue an executive order which carries with it, as pointed out in the Constitution, the weight of law. He can sit behind his desk and sign a piece of paper and essentially make a law on his own.
Executive orders have been the tools of choice for governors to change policy by making law almost instantly and letting the judiciary define what's implied by the Constitution. The pinelands of southern New Jersey had been recognized as a fragile ecosystem and a significant water supply. Brendan Byrne personally pushed to see regional land conservation become state law through a Pinelands Protection Act. But any possible legislative support wilted against a variety of interests united against land use policies imposed from Trenton. Byrne had few options to curtail development, and so a bold but risky executive order seemed like the only move left.
And so I said, okay. And I issued an executive order stopping building in the Pinelands.
He, over my doubts, by the way, expressed to him privately, implemented an executive order which was incredibly far-reaching in its scope. He asserted land use controls over about a third of the state with no legislative authority.
In an executive order, Governor Byrne officially imposed a building moratorium on the Pinelands. And even
that essentially stopped all building, and he said at the end of the executive order, this executive order will stay in effect until the legislature enacts a statute which substantially accomplishes the goals of this executive order.
He sat down and signed a piece of paper that took something like 1.5 million acres of New Jersey and said, you can't put anything here.
Developers are almost certain to challenge Byrne's executive order, and his idea of a permanent Pinelands moratorium faces strong opposition in the legislature.
And people were stunned. Some were appalled. And not only that he did it, but that he was able to do it and get away with it.
After he signed the order today, Byrne said he knows developers will suffer, but he said their children will benefit.
A summary hearing on the constitutional challenge to Byrne's order signaled that the Supreme Court would likely support the governor, and legislators quickly began backpedaling.
They went back to the legislature and said, oh my God, the Supreme Court may approve that executive order. We better pass the legislation before they do. They acted very quickly to pass the legislation. The governor signed it.
The legislature enacted the Pinelands Protection Act.
That controversial ban on building in the Pinelands is now law. Governor Byrne signed the measure today in a ceremony that reflected none of the bitter debate over the bill. As part of the ceremony, a passage from John McPhee's book on the Pinelands was read, a passage that predicts the Pine Barrens would ultimately be paved over.
I told John at that time that I was going to prove him wrong. We did. I'm going to prove him wrong.
That has been commented on time and time again as the most extensive use of an executive order in history, in New Jersey, anywhere else. And it was.
I thought his use of executive power in the creation of the Pinelands was very, very important for the state. And maybe a little stretch, because whether or not he could use an executive order in that way, the way he did, is questionable.
You know what, I respect people who disagree with the use of an executive order to impose land use controls on a good chunk of the state. On balance, though, I think it got us a bill that did have constitutional validity. Without the exercise of executive power would not have happened. And Brendan Byrne did save the Pinelands.
If the governor wants to get something done, he can pretty much get it done, assuming it's an honest effort and assuming it's within reason. And the Pinelands is a good example of that.